everybody. Well, thank you, Jen. It's a real pleasure to be here at what I think is the third of the panel series between Oklahoma State University and Sustainable Northwest on this rural urban linkages theme that we are terribly passionate about. We're really most passionate about bringing people together to find paths to solutions that really matter and that can scale across the American West. And for that, we need everyone. Urban folks, rural folks, suburban folks working together, at least ethnically, morally, and otherwise to support each other. There's no way we can get away from that, even though we might think sometimes that we can't. We can't. We've been working in the Klamath Basin for a long, long time. I'll say a few things about this, but I'd like to thank Oklahoma State for inviting us to be your partner. We've really benefited hugely from this partnership, and more every day, partly because students are showing up at our doorsteps, thanks to Jen and many others, are wanting to be interns with us. And of course, we are always open to all that because you are the future. You students are the future of this kind of approach, and we welcome you and embrace you. So please look us up, and if we don't have a place for you, we'll recommend you to Eco Trust or some of the other organizations that are working on this sort of thing as well. We are especially pleased with the progress we've made in this place, mostly because the people of the place are making the progress themselves, and we're just playing an enabling, facilitating role. And that's the role we play. We work on community energy, we work on landscape restoration, and we work on green markets. And all of those things work in fact in tandem with each other to build sustainable economies in our rural communities, but they're intimately linked with urban constituents and consumers buying what rural people produce, both as goods but also as services. So with that, I'll introduce James Honey, who's been spearheading our relationship to the Klamath for a long time. He'll give a quick introduction, and then he will introduce the panel, and they will each speak, and hopefully it will ignite you all to ask lots of questions about the Klamath and maybe a few good ideas that we could use to make this thing go forward faster. Thanks.
So, good evening, everyone, and I'm sorry I have to use this microphone, but we are being recorded, which is kind of exciting. Really glad to have you all here this evening. I'll kind of run through what we'll plan to do as our program, and then we'll jump in. First, by way of introductions, rather than me introducing folks, I'm going to have folks introduce themselves, and I think it'll be a nice kickoff for what we're all about. My name is James Honey. I am the Klamath Program Director for Sustainable Northwest. I also work on rangeland issues across the western United States. This panel is, in fact, about establishing a rural-urban connection, about sharing partnerships that have been created in the Klamath Basin over the last 5 and 6 years, partnerships between people who have been at odds with each other, and that's a nice way to express deep, deep conflict over decades, about them coming together and forging a new pathway in that basin, and then us together reaching out to the rest of the state and talking about what has been done there, and ideally engaging with you in making this happen. So this isn't as much about telling us about, or we won't tell you about rural-urban connections. We're hoping that this evening we can, in fact, foster a rural-urban connection, and that we can find the way, and we're going to have to hear from you as to how we connect this great achievement in the basin to the rest of Oregon and move forward as one Oregon together. So here's what we'll do. We'll do some introductions. I'll do a really brief PowerPoint giving you a little bit of background about the Klamath Basin, some of its natural resource issues, and in particular, the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement and Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement, 2 companion agreements that have been recently forged that lay out a new vision for much of the Klamath Basin, a vision of natural resource sharing, of redeveloping the economy to live within its sustainable means. And then what we'll do is be a lot more conversational. Really hear from some of the folks who have developed those agreements or are putting those agreements in place. We'll kind of talk to each other as we go and leave a fair amount of time at the end for your questions. So ideally, this is a rolling conversation and not us talking at you endlessly. So we'll start with a little talking at you endlessly. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists if you could introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us what community or stake or angle in the Klamath Basin you come from, and tell us about how you feel about being here tonight in this rural-urban experience. So I'll just start with Erica. Introduce yourself. What is your background? What's your stake in this Klamath Restoration Agreement? And then we'll go on down the road.
Can you guys hear me okay? So my name is Erica Terrence, and I work as the executive director of Klamath Riverkeeper, and we're based in Orleans, California, sort of the middle of nowhere, northwestern California. We're in the California side of the basin, but obviously there's a whole side in Oregon too, so we work with some of these folks on the panel and others who are have more of a stake in the Oregon side of the issues. I have a personal stake in this beyond just my organizational stake. I was born and raised on the California Salmon River. You guys know where that is? It's a beautiful river. It's great river rafting, kayaking, fishing in the right seasons. It's a great place to go hiking or camping. So I grew up there until I was 12. I moved away for about 15 years, and because I care so deeply about the place and the people there and feel very strongly that that's my community and I owe something back, I took a job at Klamath Riverkeeper and moved back there. But in terms of our organizational stake, we're a little different from everybody else on the panel here today in that we didn't negotiate at the table over these agreements, but a lot of our allies did, and a lot of these folks are representing our allies. And so we started in 2006, and our main goal was to remove 4 dams on the Klamath River and bring salmon runs back throughout the basin, undam the Klamath and bring the salmon home. That was kind of our slogan. We chose not to sit at the table and be involved in those negotiations because we use a number of tools and tactics. Sometimes that toolbox includes lawsuits, sometimes it includes grassroots organizing and protesting out in the streets. And so we basically decided it was important for there to be one group at least that worked from inside the basin and that applied pressure from the outside as needed. And I want to frame that not only as applying pressure to force parties to do things, but also applying pressure, in this case, I think now, to try to move ahead a set of agreements that we believe is ultimately a lot, to the good of the whole basin and is the best path forward. So we did a lot of analyzing these agreements and basically came to the conclusion that everybody gave a little and got a lot out of this, and that it deserves a chance to be tried out, be tested, be implemented. And so that's where we are today. In the interest of full disclosure, I'll say that I have been at Klamath Riverkeeper for 3 years, and before that I held a job at the North Coast Environmental Center, which was a party to the negotiations. So I myself have seen this process from both the inside and the outside, and that gives me an interesting a perspective of a certain sort. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to see you guys and see the interest. And I think James put it right. We're here to build a connection between our middle of the nowhere place and places like Portland, where I think you'll find most residents actually do have quite a stake as well.
Thank you. Don?
Waklisi, or hello, my name is Don Gentry. I'm vice chairman of the Klamath Tribes. Gel Sesas Maklaksem Kanga Ditchigunk. My name in the Klamath language, which was given to me by one of our elders at our Return of Twam ceremony, which is one of our endangered fish in the Klamath Basin that, the Creator placed there for us to live on, which we can no longer fish for. At this ceremony where we instituted this ceremony to, as one of our elders put it, to do things right, do first things first. And this is a ceremony that we had for many, many years and discontinued it for a time, during our reservation era and so forth. And one of our elders said it's great to have biologists and folks working on restoring your fisheries, but we've got to do our ceremony. We've got to recognize Creator, that He placed us here, and He placed these resources here for us, and we've got to pray and ask for those return of our twam. And I share that with you and these things with you to give you a better understanding of why the resources are important to us as Klamath tribal people, because it's much more than just for subsistence. It's us and it's who we are. And we have so many stories of how Creator placed these animals and these fish and these resources there for us to be stewards over. So I share that with you. That name was given to me by an elder, a very elder that said we need to do first things first. When she was alive, or when she was born, we still had our chi'als, our salmon, up in the Klamath Basin before the dam was there. So I received this name many years back, and I was honored to be given this name. And I've been living up to this, or trying to live up to this name. And Dichigyunk means having done good things, or the way that she said it, it just means lives good. So I share these things with you because we have a connection to these, the resources, and we're a people that have been here in the basin, and even archaeological evidence places us there 14,000 plus years, but our creation stories said Creator placed us there, so we have a place and a purpose there in the Klamath Basin. So our interest, I grew up hunting and fishing in the area. My dad taught that to me. He felt that that was so important for my brother and I to know, even though times had changed significantly, we really did rely on, and many of our members still do, we still hunt, fish, and gather on our former reservation areas where we have treaty rights as a part of our subsistence and culture. That's a part of who we are. In my lifetime, I've seen our resources dwindle, and I talked to my father and many elders, my father-in-law, and they share with me the changes that have happened in the basin. My father-in-law was a rancher, and my wife grew up chasing cattle around at a time in the Spey River Valley when there weren't even any fences. And their next door neighbor was like miles away, and they told me how our rivers used to be. They told me how the willows lined the rivers. They told me how the rivers would flood every spring. Places now where you don't see willows, places where you see sagebrush, which indicates something is really wrong in our basin there. So with these changes came the loss of our fishery. I was blessed to be at a time when we could catch our twam, our Lost River sucker, and our kaptu, our short-nosed sucker, and as my father taught me, take that to our elders, and that was a part of, shaped me to be who I am. It was a part of our living culture. It taught me values, it taught me what's right and wrong, and because those fish are no longer available to us, they're on an endangered species list, we can't catch these fish. Our reason for entering into this agreement is to restore these fisheries, restore these resources, because it's important to us. I have grandchildren that have never caught these fish. I have grandchildren. I had to tell the story that we don't have salmon anymore because the first Klamath Dam that went in 1917 blocked those fish to us. And so after many years of legal battles through water adjudication and so forth, and actually trying to get fish restored, our leaders felt the best thing that we could do is negotiate a settlement. Because when you negotiate a settlement, you're not dealing with just a pure amount of water. We have water rights that are being adjudicated. They're determining now in the Klamath Basin who gets how much water. But our leaders before this time, after affirmation of our treaty rights, said, we believe a settlement is the best way to go about it, because you're actually going to be addressing the real problems that affect our fisheries. You won't be just talking about an amount of water in a stream. You'll be talking about restoring those streams and those rivers and the forests that have affected the hydrology in our basin, to restore those things back so they're more sustainable and provide what all the basin citizens need. So I'm just thankful for the wisdom of our elders and leaders that promoted this concept of restoration rather than litigation to help us achieve where we're at. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about that and express our support and the reasons why the Klamath people, and I know the other tribes are in this.
And let me put in a little note about rural-urban connection. Don did what many people of the basin do regularly to try to talk to the broader Portland, Sacramento. Drove up here this morning. He'll be in the car at 7 p.m. tonight. He'll sleep at home. That's what it takes to try to start knitting us together. I just want to note, there's going to be, 12 hours in the car for, an hour and a half here. So thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman, for spending your time with us. Becky, who are you?
Hi. I am Becky Hyde. I'm a rancher in the Klamath Basin, but I was raised in the desert in between Bend and Burns. I live with my 4 children and my husband on the banks of the Sycan River on a ranch that we've worked hard to help restore the river as well as continue to run as a working ranch. And I am very thankful that all of you would even come tonight to learn about the Klamath. We need you to care about our little neck of the woods, and so that's good. And then I have one really quick thing to tell you that's about the rural, I won't call it the rural-urban divide, I will call it the rural-urban connection, which is that every couple of years I'm in a beef cooperative called Country Natural Beef, and we come to do in-stores with our stores in Portland. And it sounds really ridiculous, but when we come to town, we're incompetent, would be the word I would use. And so we've been trying to use public transportation, and sometimes it works really well. I have a very good friend named Jack Southworth, and he had done a successful job of like using the public transportation and like getting on the Max, getting off the Max, and running from one place to the other and then jumping on. And he said they were at the end of their night. They were so proud because they had gotten to where they were supposed to on public transportation, and then they were coming back, and they leaped out of one Max and ran as fast as they could because they were trying to catch the other one going the other way or whatever it does. And they got in and they sat down and they went, and the lights went out in the Max. So that, just getting here for us sometimes is hard. And I will tell you that I took public transportation today. I didn't get from where I wanted to where I wanted to, but I got within 5 blocks. So has nothing to do with anything, but.
Welcome, Becky.
Yeah.
Glenn.
My name is Glenn. Am I on? My name is Glenn Spey. I'm the Northwest Regional Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. We are commercial fishermen. That means we make our living catching salmon, and the Klamath River is the home of, historically, the home of the 3rd largest salmon run in the lower 48. It's a major issue for us because we're the folks who provide food for people's tables from the sea. We're very much like the farmers. We're independent, cuss-ass, stubborn sometimes. We're family food providers. We love what we do, and we're entirely dependent on the health of the river and the environment. We're also people of the fish, just like the tribes, so we have a lot in common with both sectors. And we've been involved in Klamath issues for a long, long time. People settled when our folks, families and ancestors settled in the lower river, they learned from the tribes. Lower river tribes were salmon harvester. We learned from them. We live in communities all up and down the coast, very rural, often very isolated, and with few economic options other than the use of natural resources like salmon. So when we find ourselves shut down, as we did over 700 miles of coastline in 2006, because the salmon runs have declined so much they couldn't tolerate any harvest. That brings us directly involved in all of these issues, and we're working in this kind of settlement framework to make sure that the river recovers, that we reopen the river to salmon so that they can come back home, and that's the upper river, folks. You know, our salmon and their salmon are the same. So one of my great joys, by the way, is a good dinner with salmon and potatoes on the side. The potatoes come from the basin farmers. That's our interest, and I'm glad to be here tonight. By the way, we all welcome hard questions, so please think up your hardest questions. We're all very much involved in this. We live and breathe this stuff and have for many years. So.
All right. So what we'll do is you'll have to tolerate a little bit of my bad narrative, and then you'll actually get to hear from people who know what they're talking about. Just as background, I've been working in the basin for 11 years now. I am the ultimate rural-urban connection. The smallest place I've ever lived is Portland, Oregon. And my wife and I used to sort of joke that it was odd to run into people at the grocery store you knew. That was a sort of experience, and it felt made us a little paranoid to be watched in a city of about 1 million people. I've just moved to New York, and at about 8.5 million, I'm feeling a lot more comfortable. I'm very anonymous. So take all of the statements about the Klamath Basin with a fairly big grain of salt. So let me start off, and then we'll bounce back to the panel with a little bit of background. And I'm going to start maybe in some negativity and not intending to dwell there, but rather to come back to how valuable these resources are, and I think the depth from which the Klamath, in many segments of the Klamath, have been able to move over the past couple years. And I'll say we talk about it as the Klamath. I want to note this doesn't mean that every community and every sub-basin is fully in agreement with this, that everything is covered. This is an agreement that covers quite a stretch of the basin, addresses many issues. The work is not done. The work will be going on for 20 and 30 years. And ultimately, I think we would share a view that ultimately this is the first step in something that does become comprehensive and does cover all of the communities in the basin. But I do want to stop because we say the Klamath Basin, and you'll see there's some a little bit of fuzziness around there. So just kind of where is it? Northern California, Southern Oregon, that's a landmass the size of Switzerland. That's a landmass bigger than 9 U.S. states. That's a place that if you're sitting in Klamath Falls, kind of right about that borderline area, and you want to get down to the bottom of the basin, you're looking at a 5 or a 6 hour drive. Just the idea of trying to get people together to talk about managing this basin is very challenging just off the geography itself. A lot of different interests in the basin, but I think fundamentally all of those interests in the basin share a place that is of tremendous ecological abundance. I'm just going to throw a few indicators of that to you. 75–80% of the birds, as some of us have been reading in the newspaper, spend some portion of their travels up and down that Pacific Flyway in the Klamath Basin. The Klamath Basin, though it's many orders of magnitude smaller than the Columbia system or the San Joaquin-Sacramento system in California, is the third largest producer of salmon historically on the West Coast, a place of tremendous natural abundance. Any one of these international assessments of biodiversity puts the Klamath Basin on the mark for tremendous amounts of endemism, species diversity, biodiversity. This is a very special and uniquely ecologically abundant place. As you would imagine, that ecological abundance has attracted people from the beginning of time. People come, tribal fishing, essential, farming and ranching as Europeans moved in. We have strong commercial fishing. Timber was a big part of the Klamath Basin. That era has largely passed and has reduced, if you will, the economic space for opportunity in this Klamath Basin. Recreation is increasingly a bigger part of the economic underpinnings of these small rural communities. And I put in parentheses there, we'll talk about it later, restoration, the very act of working on bringing back and restoring this ecological abundance is in fact showing itself to be a very significant part of what can drive this current economy and a future economy. But the Klamath Basin has been characterized, especially in the last decade, by a rotating system of crises or disasters. Those crises or disasters could be thought about as symbolizing the fact that we had reached the ends of over-allocating our resources, that effectively we had too many folks having demand on the same set of resources, and that we were really starting to experience disasters for various communities in the basin. We can start here. It's somewhat haphazard, but we can start here with what Don mentioned. That's Upper Klamath Lake. That's a view of Upper Klamath Lake when it's in one of its full algae blooms, depriving that lake of oxygen. Fish that the Klamath tribes had been dependent on for millennia, that ran thick, that really sustained that tribe, as I understand it, over time. By the time we hit the 1980s, those fish became endangered, and as Don says, today they harvest, what, 1 or 2 for ceremonial purposes? These are fish that maintained thousands of people for thousands of years, now at a point where we are afraid to harvest beyond 1 or 2 a year. We saw some very large, some of the biggest fish die-offs in U.S. history occurred in Upper Klamath Lake in the 1990s. The Klamath tribes were visited with disaster. In 2001, and this splashed across the newspapers of the United States, the Klamath irrigation project, a 200,000-acre federal agricultural irrigation project, actually one of the first irrigation projects in the western United States, was late in the season deprived of all of its water. First time there had been no water delivered to 1,200 farmers. There's mostly family farmers, very different from some of the farming that I come back from in California, large corporate farms. These are small family farms, largely. Zero water delivered in the summer of 2001. We're talking about bankruptcies. We're talking about long lines in the food line. We're talking about a division within the community over who was responsible for this that was really deep, and we'll have our folks talk about that. So 2001, the farmers are visited with crisis, followed the next year by the largest fish kill in U.S. history when, and it depends where you get your numbers from, but whether it's 35,000 or 60,000 salmon dead at the mouth of the Klamath River that summer, it was an issue of tremendous impact. One of the biggest learning points in my life has been when we were sitting around a table early in pre-settlement discussion, and a woman who teaches kindergarten at Hoopa said, "These are our people." And when I was talking to these children about salmon, it wasn't the death of a fish, it was the death of our salmon people. And I think I don't understand that yet, but I seek to understand what that means. And it's helpful to understand how the crisis was now visiting Lower Basin, and you could say it was visiting the commercial fishing industry, which saw it several years later when essentially the entire salmon harvest off, essentially running San Francisco to Astoria, was completely shut down over the precarious state of the salmon river runs. This set of issues precipitated an understanding that the system had reached its maxima, that the ways that we had been managing or trying to manage up to date or to date had not been working. And I want to kind of ground this because many of the folks here on the panel had been involved in management, were directly affected in one of these, and I guess I want to ask you guys, as a resident down at the Cal Salmon, Don, as a member of the Klamath tribes, Glenn, in your long history working with PCFFA, and Becky, you were in town in 2001. Can you share with us what these events meant for your community or for the community as you were experiencing? And give us a little background on what were the ways that we were trying to manage the resources up to 2006, let's say. So give us a sense of what these things felt like in your community, and tell us a little bit about what the status quo was in terms of how broadly we were managing the resources. And I won't pick on anyone to start, whomever wants to go first.
That the closure in 2006 meant, and we knew that was coming. The fish that we harvest are the fish that are spawned 3 years earlier. So in 2002, when that fish kill hit, and it was horrendous. You have no idea, unless you've been there, what 45 miles of rotting carcasses smells like. And what it's like to see dead fish everywhere, moving around in eddies. those are our lifeblood. We knew that was coming. That was a prediction. You know, any biologist knows that if you kill your brood stock 3 years later, you're not going to get any back to harvest. And so we knew that was coming. But the impact of essentially no livelihood for a year on families who are marginal, who live in rural areas where there's very little other work, it was devastating, absolutely devastating. It drove many families out of the region altogether. Many of them had to give up fishing, couldn't make their boat payments, couldn't keep the mortgage fees paid. If they can't do that, they can't work, they can't pay their mortgages. So it was devastating. And we still haven't fully recovered. We lost perhaps 1,000 fishing boats in that process in California and Oregon, just abandoned. You could go down and you could find boats for sale and there was nobody to buy because there's no way to make a living. What that does to communities is devastating. And we've been there before. I mean, it is an up and down kind of changeable issue. Ocean conditions change, but no one had ever seen it that bad, not in generations.
I don't know if you care to share.
Do you want me? Well, our family ranches above Klamath Lake, so we weren't part of the Project Irrigator families in 2001 who had their water shut off for the first time in, you know, almost 100 years. One of the things I think that needs to be understood about the farming community in the Klamath Project is that these, for the most part, are all family farms and ranches. These are not great, big, huge, you know, gigantic mega farms. These are families that have lived there for a long time, and I think that as Glenn said, when their water was shut off, a lot of folks went out of business. It created a tremendous amount of upset in the community. It cut right into people's hearts, I think. And at that point, well, I'm getting ahead because I like to get to and then it got better. But it was a very tough time, and I think that the ramifications of that time we still hold in our community. And I think of a farmer in particular who, whenever I hear his story, I'm sad because his son chose not to come back to the family farm because of the loss of hope around 2001. And really that's what it's all about, is, you know, being able to continue to do things into the next generation and have a future. And so I got to the point in the summer of 2001 when I did not want to read the paper anymore, because it was a brutal summer. The community as a whole responded with a tremendous amount of anger. There had been water settlement talks before 2001 that were trying to work and, you know, noodle through how we could divide water, what we could do, how we could make things better. I think the occurrences of 2001 probably put those talks on hold for a good 4 or 5 years before you could even get people to come back into the room together to have legitimate conversation. There was a backlash against the tribes in the community, which was painful and something that we're still recovering from, I think, as a community. So I think that when you have large-scale trauma in a community, and we're seeing it again this summer in the refuges with our bird population, and again, that ties back to, we can't come up with a perfect solution, but we can do a lot to do better. And when we don't, we just have these massive rotations of crisis that affect large segments of who we are. So it's not good.
Well, I was just reflecting back, because this is so much a part of my life. I remember the fish kills in the 90s, you know, to me, the things that led up to 2001. I've just go through so much. I can say that this is the time I was challenged most in my life and grew the most personally in my life. I saw the best and I saw the worst in people. And I experienced real frustration and anger and hurt as my wife read letters to the editor and cried. But then she turned around and prayed for our people and prayed for the basin. I just appreciate her heart. It was a good example for me. But it was just, I had such mixed emotions when the water was shut off to the project irrigators. Because in one sense it was one of the first times that something actually seemed to happen to maybe try to take care of our fish. When it first happened, I didn't realize the ramifications it have on the agricultural community, because I do care about my community. And actually, in a sense, because we've suffered so much loss as a people, we could actually relate to that. You know, when I heard farmers talking about, you know, I can't even make a living for my family. I can't even teach my children how to live and be responsible. I wanted to pass this farm down, and I started thinking about that, you know, and how much that related to me and my own personal experience about catching our twom. And, you know, so it was kind of a real mixed thing for me. You know, I felt like maybe the lights will come on and we'll do something right for the fish, because, you know, I saw that happen. There was just that sense of loss. And so I remembered the smell of as we were collecting those dead suckers in the lake. They call them suckers, or people call them sucker fish, but we call them twom. And loading it up into boats with the Fish and Wildlife people, and, you know, just remembered how, you know, hard that hit me, you know, where we were, you know, after seeing the populations go down to where we could no longer catch them anymore. Clear up to the water shut off, and the protests, and in a sense it just kind of made us as a people feel like we're minimized even more. You know, it became, you know, if you cared for the fish, you know, or, you know, the fish became minimized. You know, we became minimized because we're sucker-loving Indians. You know, I mean, we had some young farmer kids coming through the town of Chiloquin after duck hunting and drinking and looking for sucker-loving Indians and shooting up the schoolyard signs, you know, and it was terrible, and calling out Indian kids and separating them out from the white kids, you know, at the bus stop. And there was so much fear, there was so much anger, there was so much hurt. So I'm mindful of those things, but at the same time, to give you an idea of the hope that I had a man, he called him the potato seed man, and he called me up. He was from that community where those boys are from, and he apologized. He says, I know I can't apologize for them. They're not my children, but they come from our community. But I want you to know that's not all of us. You know, I really apologize. I'm so sorry that even happened. And he came and had dinner with us. And so I had a hope that things could get better. And so I'm pretty emotional about this, because it affects all of us in our community. And I know farmers were stressed. People died of heart attacks. People lost their families. So it was a hard thing, and I can understand, I guess, why people reacted the way that they did, you know, towards us. I mean, they had all-you-can-eat sucker fish fries so you could raise money to battle the Klamath tribes and our water rights, you know, and get rid of the Endangered Species Act, you know. Suckers, the other white meat, you know. We actually, so those are the things that we went through, but I can say I came out of that with a greater understanding of the complexity of our community, and that we're all in this together. And I just thank you for thankful for being taught by my elders that a certain way to look at our neighbors and our friends. I mean, our legends are basically, if the only thing we have to share with somebody that comes to see us is a flea, we'll share that flea, you know. We've always been that kind of a sharing, caring people, and so I overcame and I grew, and my hope grew when we were able to negotiate this agreement and sign on the bottom line. It was just phenomenal to me. And it's, you know, the hope that we have for our basin, that we can work together and share the resources and manage the resources and do things in the right way. So I apologize for the emotion, because the very question just stirred up all those years and all those emotions. And so, you know, I did want to leave on the positive note. You know, there's a hope. We have a hope in the basin, though we know there's people that still have some anti-tribal views, people that are spending money to oppose the KBRA, and people that have said in the paper just some, you know, they have anti-tribal sentiments. We have a lot to overcome, you know, but we're more than sucker-loving Indians. We love our people, we love our basin. You know, we see that we're all neighbors, and I would mention that Chwam ceremony. Actually, part of that ceremony is to pray for your neighbors to the north, south, east, and west. You know, we're more than just us, and that's the way that we're taught. And I'm just thankful that we ended up in this agreement, because I think that's the way our elders and our ancestors would want us to be.
I just want to say, and I'm sorry, Don, I think that I asked that question because what we're talking about is real stuff. Real stuff. Not, this isn't a way to, you know, convey a point. I didn't experience it, but I've been around it long enough, and you need to know that this is the place that folks live in, and some of us visit in. And it's not a pretty place to live or visit in if it lives in the way that it has been. It's a wonderful place full of wonderful people, but if that dynamic is alive and well, this affects us all. You drive through Klamath Falls and you feel this. You drive down the basin and you feel this. So I apologize. I don't mean to set it up to be emotional just to play, but you got to understand this is really real stuff that really is about communities and the root of where we come from, and some of where, and I do want to turn to Cole, and if you'll let me, I'll do it off one anecdote, and then you get to start us on the next round. Yes?
Since I became vice chairman of the Klamath Tribes, people have been kind of teasing me that the John Boehner of the Klamath Tribes, because I do get emotional.
And I hope Erica's going to let me get away with this, because I want to flip you with one anecdote that Erica was actually essential in. A couple falls ago, on a beautiful, mid-October day, really warm in the little town of Merrill, Oregon, some of these folks drove up to the Merrill Potato Festival with cars full of salmon from the lower basin, and I believe it's the women of the Lions Club feed somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people free. Generally, it's been a kind of a chipped beef with a little barbecue sauce and then some potatoes on the side. And that day, folks came up from the lower basin and did a traditional salmon bake, and the ladies of the Lions Club served out of the cafeteria there. Your plate came with chipped beef in its barbecue sauce and local spuds. First ever Fish and Chips Festival. That was also the day that Mr. Gentry and his family paraded in the Merrill Potato Fest parade, which goes right downtown, and it was a Klamath Tribes float, and it said the Klamath Tribes support basin agriculture. And those are the anecdotes of the potential change and the real change, the real lived change that we are starting to feel because of the agreements we'd like to chat with you a little bit about. Glenn, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the agreements.
Yeah, I want to stress that it wasn't easy. Keep in mind that for years, most of the stakeholder groups in the basin were locked in litigation. Nobody won. They were locked in the political process. Nobody won. They were gripped in back-to-back upper, middle, and lower basin crises. Nobody won. And out of that frustration, out of that realization that we were all in it together, a group, a sort of moderate middle group started meeting with each other and saying, can we do something better? Can we do something different? But I really don't think it was until that decade where everybody in the basin suffered something. Everybody suffered. That we all realized that it just wasn't going to continue that way, or it couldn't continue that way. It wasn't sustainable. And that, more than anything else, is what drove people to start talking to their neighbors, talking to people in the upper basin, lower basin, talking to people that we were gripped in conflict with, in some cases for almost a century. And some people didn't come along. Some people are still in the past and still trying to fight the fight in Congress or fight the fight in the courts in the hopes that they will win because everybody else will lose. But those of us in the middle ground, those of us who were on those front lines, are doing our darndest to come up with an agreement where people win instead of I win, you lose. And that's a darn hard thing to accomplish. And in a way, it was driven by desperation to find a new route out of a very serious problem.
So let me show them a little bit about what came out of the desperation, because I think it's actually more than the product. It's not as desperate. It comes from desperation, but it's fairly meaningful. And I think to key you guys up next, and Erica, you're first, both being a negotiator at one point and now not a negotiator, I'll frame up a little bit about what's in these agreements, why we think they're valuable, and then if you can talk about, what do these really mean? Why for this moment, say, we put litigation aside, we decide to embrace a broader approach. Tell us what you think comes out of the particular stakes that you're looking for that comes out of this pathway that might not have been available in the prior. So Glenn's talked about conflict. We don't need to talk about how it was. It was. That's what came before the settlement agreement. I'm going to point to a guy who some of you may want to talk to in the corner of the room. That's Bob Gravely of Pacific Corp. He's the lucky guy associated with 4 major hydro dams in the Klamath River Basin, which in a sense became the rallying point to, in effect, the relicensing of this this hydroelectric project pulled together stakeholders from across the basin let's restart later. You don't want to restart. We're late already. But in a sense, this process that had started with figuring out how to relicense and what the next license for this hydroelectric project brought together a number of the stakeholders. I'm not going to go into any, we're going to skip a lot of stuff, but I'll put it this way. The title of this Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement is an agreement for the restoration of public and tribal trust resources, and these are the words that I think are really meaningful, and the sustainability of affected communities. I was in the negotiating room a number of times when things would get pretty difficult about how a resource would be allocated, and it was generally a different member of the various negotiating teams would make a statement and say, wait a second, we agreed that this was all about making it better for our people. So from that point, we've got to find a way to move forward. So I think it's very powerful that this complex legal agreement that probably weighs, 5 or 6 pounds if you've got it together, has up to 500 or 600 pages if you include the appendices, has as its subtitle that this is about the sustainability of affected communities, that this ultimately came back to people. There were statements that came many times. We stand for fish and farms. We stand for all the communities in the basin. This was tribal people talking about their agricultural neighbors, farmers and ranchers talking about tribal people. This agreement, full of legalese, has as an objective somewhere in it to achieve peace on the river. I don't think that's meaningless. This is part of what comes with this, is to really deal with the people issues. And just a quote to lighten it up a little bit, Paul Simmons, a water attorney for the Klamath water users, said, the task that they were set after is like in The Wizard of Oz when they said, bring me the broom of the wicked witch of the West. Well, gosh darn it, in some ways, people did it. And they did it through two agreements, the KBRA, Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, which deals with all non-hydro issues, deals with restoration, water allocation, economic redevelopment in the basin, and then the Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement, which deals with the Pacific Core hydropower facility on its own. But they are linked together and they work in concert. And to put it so simplistically, this is a way to look at what these two agreements do together. They share water. For the first time, we have an agreement about who gets what water, when, and how, so that people can have some reliability in terms of economic issues and some knowledge that we have the right quanta and the right times for what the fish need. It has a pillar of economic development or redevelopment where you begin to look at how the basin is construed today, make investments to align it to a resource regime that is focused on the sustainability of the resource. There's a number of provisions that come with that. It comes with a broad-scale habitat restoration. This is not simply about allocating water up and down the basin. This is not simply about the impact of the hydroelectric project. This is about the real changes that have been made in that ecosystem from sea to source and looking back on it and acting at all levels in that system. Importantly, doing so with an allocation of funding that allows us to learn from our activity. We're always very good at going out and doing restoration. We're not very good at monitoring and learning from it. Puts together pretty comprehensive, some of the deepest, Glenn can talk about this, some of the most extensive science that has been done in terms of looking at the potential impacts of this. And finally, all this hangs together with a proposed dam removal of 4 dams in the main stem Klamath River. These are 4 dams that do not provide irrigation water. Dams that are important to the irrigation infrastructure remain in place. And importantly, this is an agreement to remove dams that includes the owner of the dams. The owner fines and 2 public utility commissions in both Oregon and California have found that it is beneficial for ratepayers to move through a dam removal process as opposed to the unknown and at least double the cost of keeping the dams and trying to bring them up into modern environmental compliance. There's a lot of technical stuff. I think I'm going to ask you guys, inside this agreement, starting with you, Erica, can you talk about what you find in the agreement, why it's beneficial, and perhaps kind of why you have chosen this pathway for these particular issues? And if I can go that way back to Glenn.
Yeah, I can try. There's so many responses flashing through my head, but let me take you back to around pre-2006. I worked at the North Coast Environmental Center, and in that role, in that capacity, I did sit at the negotiating table representing that nonprofit. And at that time, we were negotiating a lot over the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, the KBRA. And the assertion that was made was essentially, if we change the way we manage water and water allocating in the basin, there actually is enough to go around. Maybe nobody gets 100% of what they would want, but we can avoid these rotating crises, and we can offer a lot more stability for communities from one end of the basin to the other. I thought, that sounds great, but is it actually possible to rebalance in a way that meets everybody's needs? And so at that time, I launched into hiring a couple of scientists to try to help assess. And essentially what they said is this is worlds better than the status quo. And I think that that is important. It helps us put into perspective one of the things I really like and have come to like much more over time about these agreements is We know the status quo, and we know that everybody suffers, and so you have to you have to look at what your alternative is, and if your alternative is from bad to worse, then that's not really an option. So I guess that sort of frames it up and answers part of your question. Coming from where I sit now at Klamath Riverkeeper, from a conservationist's perspective and somebody whose job it is to look out for the river and the salmon, there are things I like that I think are really good for the ecosystem. I think it has great protections for groundwater. I like the way that the water model, having studied it quite a bit, the way that the water model caps agricultural withdrawals without completely wiping out agriculture. I think that's huge and a landmark in a lot of ways, not just in the Klamath Basin, but in other places where they face similar challenges. Also, just to take a step back, this is, there are other ways we could get there potentially. We could litigate for a long time. We could try to use the Clean Water Act to at least address the impacts of the dams. But that's a very piecemeal strategy when you get right down to it. And one of the things that I find really appealing about this settlement is it's large scale. It is trying to address from one end of the basin to the other a lot of the challenges that we've faced. And then to take a step back even further, when we tie our fates together with people who are different than us in some ways, but who are people just like us, I think that's how we're going to make it in the Klamath, and that's how we're going to make it on this planet. And I remember when when I came and entered into the negotiations, they were already rolling ahead. They'd already been going on for a few years, at least. People in Becky's community could hardly say fish, and we could hardly say farms. I mean, we were could hardly be in the same room together. And so it's really important to see how far we have come as communities, besides what's good environmentally, or what's good for agriculture, or what's good for a particular tribe. So hopefully that helps.
Other reactions, Don?
Well, to me, it's a real comprehensive approach to complex issues. It's really organizes and structures restoration in a way I think that will be helpful. It calls for a certain amount of dedication of funding and resources to really make restoration happen, but it really provides a structure for all the entities that are involved in federal agencies and counties and states to work together with the resources that we do have to mount a cooperative effort for meaningful restoration. So it provides that foundation, that structure, and it addresses some of the fundamental problems, the fact that water was over-allocated. There's a reduction in water demand, reduction in amount of withdrawals for irrigation purposes. But there's also, come with that, there's more guaranteed assurances what water will be available for agriculture. Unlike the wishes of some in our basin, it doesn't get rid of the Endangered Species Act, but what it does is if you restore the fish and you have healthy fish populations, the Endangered Species Act won't come into play. It does take advantage of certain provisions that allow landowners to move in the right direction, and provides a certain ability for incidental take as we're moving in the right direction. So it works. I mean, I think it'll work. I think it's well conceived. Took a lot to negotiate it, but it's comprehensive. It really will, with the water assurances to the agricultural community, it'll help stabilize that. When fish are restored, tribal members will be fishing, commercial fishermen will be fishing. I think, and it also provides some opportunity for folks to willingly retire water rights and provides somewhat of a soft landing for those that, you know, if they opt to get out of the agricultural business. I mean, we really have too many people trying to make it on the limited water and lands that we have up there, and it addresses that. And it provides opportunities for those that are willing to retire water rights and provide more water in the stream. So I think it's, I mean, and there's still opportunity for folks to continue to support it and be involved in it, you know, with some of the other elements that have yet to be developed. Some of the folks that even maybe opposing the KBRA can still, you know, participate. And so I think it's probably the most comprehensive approach to address the real issues that we face.
Story that kind of symbolizes what these agreements mean to me, and it came long before these agreements even came about. In probably about 2005, there was a series of meetings that went over about an 8-month period, and it was the first time that just in the Upper Basin, that highly divided ag community and that tribal community came back together in meetings. And those meetings, just to be in the room together, there were people outside protesting those meetings just because there were people even in the room together. That's how, that was pretty interesting. But I remember sitting in these meetings, and there were, you know, maybe like 7 or 8 farmers and 5 tribal people, and we were visiting one day, and we had gotten really, we had started to look at numbers, right? So we'd spend hours and hours like looking at very confusing graphs about, well, if these people got this much water, and the lake fish got this much water, and the farmers got this much water, and the fish downstream got this much water, and the refuges got this much water, how much water would it be? And then you've got all these complicated graphs, and you're just looking at them. Honestly, you have no clue. Most people like me, you're like, I don't even understand all these numbers and lines and everything. We were sitting around one day, and it's like, I think it was comforting for a while to be in numbers. One of the farmers started to try to think about, like, they were trying to grapple with the idea that these people have suffered a huge loss, right? So there's some farmers in this room that are suddenly realizing, okay, they've lost their fishery. All right, how do we fix that? So, you know, sitting around, okay, how do we fix that? And there were farmers going, okay, well, we could pay you. We'll pay you for the fish you lost. How many fish did you lose? And then we'll put a number on that fish, and then we'll pay, and then we can pay you for this fish. And I don't want it to sound funny. What I want it to be, what I want it to come across to you is how human this is. That it was an act of kindness, a first step towards an act of kindness. How do we fix this, right? How do we fix it? And I remember there was this kind of this flurry going on about this, and then the former chairman of the Klamath Tribes was in the room, and I looked at him and said, well, what would it mean to the tribes if we just said we're sorry? He started to cry, and he said, it would be worth $1 million. And then one of the farmers in that room went home that night to Tule Lake and was in a bar in Tule Lake and shared this story with another farmer. Ends up in a bar fight of some sort. You know, because suddenly you have this farmer that was like, oh my gosh, I got it. And this certain farmer that got it, really got it, and is so committed and still with us today. That's it. I mean, that's all I have to say, right? So and then imagine then a certain amount of your leadership getting it, and then imagine some of your community not getting it. and actually staying really angry, which is kind of where we are today. So then you've like moved the painful divide over here. So like we can get along, but then it's really still rocky between those entities that don't, you know.
Well, I don't know how to follow that particularly. These guys are all tough acts to follow, but I will add a few things. There have been various criticisms of the agreement. Most of them are off base. There are some legitimate grievances. It's complicated. Yes, it is. If you're going to accomplish big things, you have to do it in a complicated way. If you're going to solve some of the worst water wars in the West for the past 100 years, it might be complicated to do it. It's long-term. It's a 50-year restoration agreement. Well, it took us 150 years to screw it up. It might take a little time to fix it. Some of those things have to grow back, and it takes time to do that. It doesn't, one of the criticisms is it doesn't solve all the problems in the basin. Well, it doesn't solve the problems in the Middle East either. It doesn't solve global warming, but where do you start? You start with solving something. And it will solve some big problems, water overallocation problems, tribal issues, and sustainability issues. That's a lot right there. It opens up a river for the first time in over 90 years. It would double the salmon runs, and these are very valuable runs to our folks. It would improve water quality up and down the basin. No, it won't solve every problem, but hey, let's start there. The other criticism is, well, it's going to be hard to get through Congress. Well, of course it's going to be hard to get through Congress. Right now, everything is hard to get through Congress. Right, nothing gets through Congress. But when you come right down to it, what other options do we have? We have the option of more of the same. We had a decade of heart-wrenching economic insecurity and collapse after collapse of communities that are full of people that have jobs and lose their jobs. We have bird die-offs, we have fish die-offs, we have rotating water quality problems up and down the basin. None of the critics, none, have come up with a viable alternative. It's so easy to say no to change, but it's so hard to say, well, let's do something different because there's a better path. There is no better path. And I have always challenged our opposition to come up with something besides just no. We don't want to do that. Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to do more of the same? I don't think that's enough.
So it's hard to time keep when you're being real, so I apologize for that. But I want to turn it over to everyone else for the next 15 minutes or so. As we do, we need to talk about where we are and some of what we'd like to ask of you. But I'll stop, we'll stop, and there is a microphone out there. We'd ask that you use the microphone because we are recording this. So if you have questions, especially, give us questions, comments, etc. You can do that. Let's try to be short so we get a lot of people. And I think some of us can be around. Bob's agreed to be around for a little bit if you want to talk about Pacific Core's perspective on this. We can sit right out there and chat for quite a while. But if anyone has questions or observations, the mic is open. 15 minutes. Mr. Grant. You have to be recorded.
Gotta go on the record.
My name is John Grant. I'm recently moved to Portland with a history of water battles in California and then later in Montana. Lori Francis and I were just down in Klamath Falls. The divisiveness is still palpable. It just feels rough still. But my question specifically, James, maybe you can answer this quickly. How is the Klamath, as a federal irrigation project, maintained its small family farm nature when so many in California, for example, are nearly all corporate? And then secondly, and then I'll sit down, for incentivizing a retirement of water rights, presumably for in-stream flows higher in the basin, are the upstream diverters participating in that as well? but mainly what would be the aim in terms of reduced acreage? Not the aim necessarily, but what would be the effect of net acreage reduction of productive agriculture in the basin if those rights were retired?
Thank you. So Becky definitely needs to answer the second because we have a very creative way about this, and you know we go to kind of easy ways to express stuff. So we talk about water rights retirement and land idling. Part of what we're trying to do is farm as much as possible with as least amount of water as possible, and that's different than fallowing land. You might have to fallow some land, but it's a different construct, and that sustainability of affected communities, there's a lot of discussion around that, because the easy one is just, okay, shut off pumps, for the next blank number of acres. We weren't about shutting off pumps. We were about providing fish for people who need fish and egg for people who are an egg. And I'm not going to answer your question, John, about the size of the average farm. I'll give you, John and I are friends with a company called the Boswell Company and a family called the Boswell Company, the Boswell family. I have a friend in the Klamath Project. He's one of the biggest farmers in the Klamath Project. I think he farms 14,000 acres with his brothers. He said the smallest farm he saw down in Tulare County amongst some of these cotton guys was like 35,000, and the 35,000 acre guys couldn't do it at all. And they're running on, and he's huge. He's huge in the Klamath Irrigation Project. I don't know why it is, but I will say this about why this agreement is important. Those of us who are here are interested in agriculture and ag practices. We need to have farmers in place if farmers are going to change their ag practices and continue to feed us. I have guys who are commodity producers who pump a lot of chemicals onto their stuff, and they're saying, let me be here so that I can change. Because the only way I can change is if I'm still here. My daughter is running all organic, and I'm learning a lot from her. But unless I'm here, I can't change. And it's an interesting thing to think about, because we jump again to really easy ways of thinking about the world. Big commodity farmers, It's a question about allowing people to remain and to transition, and I think that's a very interesting issue across our western piece. And Becky, do you want to talk more about how we're retiring water?
Yeah, so I think it's one of the things that's really there is the project irrigators who are changing the way they use water, and then up above the lake, we are also spending thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, again, in meetings, trying to be really thoughtful about how we adapt the way we use water in our tributaries. I think if you look around 2001, there were some ideas about, well, let's just downsize the Klamath Project. And the way that was going to be done was really piecemeal, and frankly would not have been effective because it wasn't well thought out. So, for example, right now, when we're looking in the tributaries of the Sprague River, the Sycan River, the Wood River, and we're talking about how are we going to manage water, we look at things like, well, where are the important springs for fish? Or where are the things where we can get, where downsizing agriculture will have a benefit, and where can we leave it alone? So it's a slow, thoughtful process instead of a, oh gee, if you just turn off everybody's pump, it'll be fine and fish will be okay. No, they won't. They won't be okay. If you pull the plug on all of these little family farms and ranches, what is their option? What can they do? What they can do is that they can cut themselves into itty-bitty pieces, and then you have, 6 landowners on that stretch of the river with 1 horse grazing the river. They may not be irrigating, they may not be ag anymore, but you haven't fixed the problem, if that makes sense. So we're just trying to be thoughtful and in some cases, slow the damn thing down. We didn't get here yesterday. We aren't going to fix everything by tomorrow. Let's be thoughtful, people.
Glenn, and then another question. Yep, Glenn, and then you're up.
Talking about being thoughtful.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me.
Glenn's got one little point, and then go.
Yeah.
So go. And then
There is in the agreement a willing seller buyout or to reduce demand above the project, and within the project, they're really using 19th century technology, open, unlined irrigation ditches. There's a lot of money that can be put to better conserving the water and better using it. And that's a lot of what is doing it. The important thing is the farmers are doing that. Right. They know best how to do it. If we harness the creativity of the farming community, they can come up with some solutions. What we do is work with that as part of a bigger whole. Sorry.
Well, talking about thoughtfulness and kind of looking at the big picture and all that, there are a couple of things that's just come in my mind. One thing is, do you, as if I understand, so you are thinking maybe going from conventional to organic, but have you been thinking of changing the crops to some which are more, which are less water demanding from the commodity crops? But then that thing really requires that the farm bill should be changed as a kind of thing that keeps agriculture now as it is. And so have you ever think about kind of, do you have some thoughts about the farm bill, and where are you as individual, as a farming community regarding the farm bill? Because that exists. I mean, Eric Blumenauer, Oregon representative, is very active in change of farm bills, so it's not kind of a thing that is far away from Oregon. So have you ever been kind of thoughtful about the farm bill that has not been basically changed since has been made, which is like, what, 50, 60 years? And I think its time is passing by, so that's kind of future. Have you ever do you think something about that future from that perspective?
Want to go, Becky?
What I wish you could do is go on the Klamath Water Users Fall Harvest Tour, which happens in the fall. And what you would learn is that there are some very innovative farmers in the Klamath Project who are doing all kinds of creative things and thinking about their future and how they operate. That doesn't mean everybody is on the cutting edge of innovation, right? Some of us are, it's like me. Oh God, it's another day, we got to put a load of laundry in. You know, I mean, life is imperfect, right? When you bring up the Farm Bill, I would say that because our communities have been so focused on solutions through these agreements, we have not, in my mind, been focusing a lot on, you know, how can we impact the Farm Bill, just because we're too overwhelmed trying to figure out what we're doing just with these agreements. But point well taken, and also, as we talk about the rural-urban connection, we should also talk about this scale of ag and this transition that James is talking about. If you're not the perfect 2-acre organic farm selling at the farmer's market, you don't count. We need to get a different thought pattern there, because there's small family, ag in the middle, family farms and ranches that are dying all over this country, they're not mega, they're not tiny little, I'm an organic perfection thing. But do they deserve to continue? Yes.
So
that all, as you know, as you said, all mid-sized farms are basically now suffering in America, or they're overtaken by corporations or just abandoned. And you need to raise your voice in I guess,
oh, good, I'm
community.
here.
So let's do, one more question, and then we'll do like 1 minute sort of closing thoughts from you guys. And then those who want to get on to dinner can do so, and those who want to corner people and get more out of them can as well. So, sir.
Yes, I'll be very quick, and maybe we can talk later. Is there in terms of the fishery, and this is really going to be a three-part, is there a limited entry for new fishermen that wish to come in? The second thing is, what provisions might there be if a farmer changes to subdivide property and put in second homes, because now this is going to be such a restored ecology? And the third gets towards, you mentioned the incidental takings permit. Is there going to be a third document or like a habitat conservation plan or something that will be dealing with those endangered species regulations?
So why don't we go Glenn, Becky, and then Don and/or Erica can, but start at fishermen.
Remember all the questions. There are limits placed on the harvest by the laws of biology, basically, as well as federal laws. There is only so many fish that are allowed to be captured because we always want to make sure we have plenty of spawners to come back to replace the next generation. So it's not a limited entry like you would find in places like the New England fisheries, but it's limited in that it's limited by the basic biological systems and constraints, and we always have to live within those constraints. Sustainability is what fishermen are well aware of because it's our communities that suffer if things collapse.
Becky, do you want to talk about, how about you do the sort of, are there provisions around subdivision? How would that work?
Keep in mind that most of the basin,
Or I can take it.
most of the upper basin is in Oregon. Oregon has some very strict land laws that prevent sprawl, and those are farms. So they're outside the urban growth boundary of Klamath Falls. They're going to be farms, and the point of having those kind of restrictions is so that there will always be farms.
And if I can go to the third document concept, which goes to your questions about limitations on what people can do with their land, we've basically left it open, and you can opt in or you can stay the hell out, your choice. In the off-project area, each landowner gets to make a hard choice. So do they want in or do they want out? That is what is happening in that area now. I would say this, that certain types of activities are known to be conducive toward restoration, and those are likely to be covered in a habitat conservation plan. One of the key provisions of the KBRA is bringing in funds to develop a very large-scale habitat or general conservation plan that would allow us to understand that incidental take permit at the watershed, or at least at the reach scale, rather than at the property scale. And we can talk detail offline, but yes. Mayor Sam Adams can ask a question.
So the mayor is curious, how can Portlanders help make this a win-win situation?
Okay, look at that. Thank you, Mayor. We'll say, with thanks to Mayor Sam Adams, we'll use that as our closing round with our four folks. So, the mayor just asked us a question. This is the cool thing about being live. Becky goes first.
We need the mayor of Portland and all Portlanders to get a hold of Senator Wyden and say, make these Klamath agreements happen. This matters. And we need all of Portland to love the Klamath Basin and come down. We need you. How's that?
That's good. It wasn't 140 characters? Okay, 140 characters, Mr. Spey.
We absolutely need Senator Wyden's help to get this passed through Congress. Whole chunks of it can't happen without a congressional authorization, so we really need that. That's the next step. We've done a lot of homework. We've done a lot of made a lot of landmarks. We've got the funds being built up now. We're ready to go, but we've got to get it through Congress. And Senator Wyden's a key player in that fight. He has been missing in action to date, and we really need him.
Don.
I don't think we have much to add to that. Really, that's the first things that came to my mind. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay, this could be your closing statement. There we go. Erica?
I completely agree. This is the same message here. We really want and need the support of Senator Wyden to help make this legislation move and make these agreements happen. If you want to break it down into steps, I think there's a lot people in Portland can do, both in terms of thinking about how you're a stakeholder, talking to your neighbors about it, talking to the people you work with about it. But also, Portland could pass a resolution. There's all kinds of things you could do. We have a petition over there on the table, which is the signatures on that petition will go to lawmakers. And really, in terms of breaking it down into steps, Senator Wyden needs to hear from constituents that matter to him. So that is partly us, but I think the broader the circle, the stronger we'll be, and so it certainly includes all of you as well. Thanks.
So if I can add, thank you for coming out. Learn, that's good. Shop, Where's your food come from? Are you buying basin potatoes? Are you buying wild-caught salmon? Are you buying basin beef? I mean, visit, engage. These are great communities. Sometimes they can seem a little bit scary. They're not. We need to understand each other better. Just visitation counts a lot. And then finally, think about this. If we see economic implosion all around the little city-state of Portland, what will Portland be? And you really have to ask yourself, are we protecting the economy of the state? Are we protecting the economy of Portland? I think these folks bring the idea that we need to think about the state holistically in terms of economic issues, and it does behoove Portlanders to have a state in which they can draw safe food, safe recreation, a pleasant place to live, and not be, in effect, a city with walls around it, while the rest of our state sort of wallows in the disaster of not being able to move forward on our natural resource management. So thanks a lot for your time. There's tons of materials over there. Folks can stick around, and we really appreciate you coming. Thank you.